I got loyalty, got royalty inside my DNA.
Hey Internet friends! Within all of us is the divine writing we call genetic code. Networks of folks might contain vastly different genetic data and proclivities, but researchers have discovered one thing that unites us all. Our DNA has memory, the ability to contain whispers of the past, felt in the ricochet of inherited experiences of our ancestors, the history of an entire bloodline pumping through the veins of the present. At the beginning of 2019, it was reported that over 26 million individuals had taken an at-home DNA test. But the companies and individuals seeking to profit off of the most unique thing about us still remain largely a mystery. The following videos are ones I put out in 2017 and 18 when I began my research on for-profit DNA companies and their practices, focusing on the two superpowers holding the largest trove of human DNA, Ancestry DNA, and 23andMe. While these videos have stood alone in the past, in this video I've merged them all together to tell a more complete story of what these companies are doing with your DNA, because something strange is going on, and it's time we get to the bottom of it. This video started with a question I asked on Twitter. What do you think places like Ancestry DNA and 23andMe do with your DNA after they send you the test results? I gotta say, y'all had some really intriguing responses, ranging from speculation on creating databases and the use of those databases, to answers like organ or human cloning. So I was curious and I had to find out the answer to my question. But my research led me to an unexpected conclusion, being that social media networks and DNA test sites have a lot in common, specifically as it relates to data collection and third-party involvement. Because, spoiler alert, outlined in the terms of service that you're supposed to read before you spit into a tube and ship it back to the testing facility, both Ancestry DNA and 23andMe disclose that they will store your DNA and might even sell it to a third party. Doesn't this sound familiar to Facebook's treatment of your data? The data that we willingly give them, telling the social network where we work, who we're friends with, and when we're traveling. The social media network knows what we look like and where we've been based on the photos we post. They have our emails and our phone numbers and our physical location based on our IP address. And in this respect, the connection between data mining and DNA mining is you. You are the resource. You're not the customer. You're the product. In the age of social media and open data, we're comfortable sharing highly personal information online. And I guess our own DNA code is no exception. Except in the case of DNA testing, you're actually paying the companies to make a buck off the most unique thing about you. But again, it's all stated in the terms and conditions, which I'm not saying makes it right, but it means you should know what you're getting into. So what exactly are you getting yourself into when you ship off a tube of your own spit to one of these testing centers? Let's take a closer look at the two most prominent companies in the DNA testing field. Disclaimer, I'm not a scientist and I'm certainly not an attorney, so to cover myself from a legal perspective, all things said henceforth will be dubbed pure speculation, though I will leave a breadcrumb trail of links in the comments. Let us begin with Ancestry.com, who currently markets their DNA kits with the lure of tracing your family generations back to a family tree or uncovering your ethnicity with Ancestry DNA. And in their terms of service, it states that Ancestry DNA will internally analyze users' results to make discoveries in the study of genealogy, anthropology, evolution, languages, cultures, medicine, and other topics. What has become the largest for-profit genealogy company in the world was started by Paul Allen and Dan Taggart. They originally started out as a company called Infobases, which offered Latter-day Saints publications on discs in 1990. And now, decades later, what they started has morphed into the world's foremost site for people to go research their roots. Ancestry.com was bought out in 2012, and Paul Allen remains a serial entrepreneur now living in Washington, D.C. And curiously, in 2016, co-founder Dan Taggart was sentenced on 4 third-degree felony charges, 3 for attempted forcible sex abuse, abuse, and one for attempted sex abuse of a child. The Ancestry.com headquarters are based in Lehi, Utah, a town named after Lehi, a prophet in the Book of Mormon. And I don't know about y'all, but I certainly didn't know this. One of the core tenets of the Mormon faith is that the dead can be baptized into the faith after their passing. Baptism of the dead evolved from the beliefs that baptism is necessary for salvation, and that the family unit can continue to exist together beyond mortal life if all members are baptized. So I guess that explanation explains why the Mormons are so interested in tracing back family trees. For them, genealogy is a way to save more souls and strengthen the eternal family unit. Follow-up question to that statement I read directly off the internet. Is it a way to trace back family units, or is it a way to keep track of bloodlines? It's reported that Utah's population is 67% Mormon, but Mormon temples aren't the only thing you'll find in the Salt Lake State. You'll find our NSA overlord's lair there, otherwise known as the Utah Data Center, aka the Intelligence Community Comprehensive National Cybersecurity Initiative Data Center, which is a data storage facility out in the middle of nowhere for the United States intelligence community, and it's designed to store mega amounts of data. Interesting, right, when you factor in what Ancestry DNA is doing. Let's take a peek at Ancestry.com's investors and also the companies that those investors invest in. That was difficult for me to say, and I'll let you noodle on that while I move over to 23andMe. Through their DNA testing, you can learn a lot about yourself, how your genetics can influence your risk for certain diseases. You can trace your ancestry, and if you're thinking about starting a family, you can find out if you're a carrier for certain inherited conditions. The company was co-founded by Ann Wojcicki, ex-wife of Google co-founder Sergey Brin. Fair warning, I'm one of those people who automatically associates Google with government intelligence because there's evidence out there to support the blurred lines between intelligence agencies, social media networks, and search engines. Look at this cool interactive chart I found documenting the amount of times that the Obama administration met with Google at the White House. Speaking of the White House and Google, you might have seen Sergey in the news recently. He made headlines when he joined a protest against Trump's immigration order. Sergey's family immigrated from the Soviet Union to the United States in 1979 to escape Jewish persecution. And as a child, he attended the Johns Hopkins Center for Talented Youth, an academic institution with famous alumni like Mark Zuckerberg and Lady Gaga. Sergey and his ex-wife are fascinating folk. Back in 1998, Sergey set up an office in Ann's sister Susan's garage. Since Susan is now the CEO of YouTube, you would think that when her sister uploads a video to her 23andMe channel, you would think that if she's going to boost it up with fake views, that she would at least throw some bots in there to, I don't know, like it, dislike it, comment on it. Isn't this strange? Millions of views, 10 likes. Ancestry.com's YouTube channel is only marginally better. If you look at a video with comparable views, then you see that there's much more engagement on the video. Also, I noticed 23andMe uses leading technology from a San Diego biotech firm called Illumina to genotype your DNA. In 2014, Ann said that 23andMe would have one of the largest databases out there, if not the largest, and that would enable her scientists to do a tremendous amount of discovery into the possible genetic causes of ailments like Parkinson's disease. And I just want to say this before all the science enthusiasts out there start shaming me for criticizing scientific research. Just because you were groomed to work with integrity doesn't mean that your bosses were, or that anyone above them holds them to any standard of integrity. What's the government going to do? Police itself? I'll show you where my train of thought is going. Throughout the 20th century, thousands of Americans were sterilized without their knowledge or their consent in the name of improving the gene pool. If someone like me was to come out and say that while it was happening, imagine the public ridicule I would have received. While I know that research and scientific advancement saves lives, I also know that questioning what's in the Kool-Aid before you drink it also saves lives. Here's an example from 23andMe. With their customers being their biobank on which to capitalize with various patents. Through this biobank that customers paid to be a part of, they were able to patent the technology for making designer babies in 2013. The idea is that you could say, I want to have this type of child and generate the DNA with that profile. But 23andMe assured the press they wouldn't be utilizing this patent, which makes no sense in my simple mind. But the fact is, the customer biobank DNA was utilized for this purpose, and guess what? It was outlined in the legal agreement. Alrighty, now let's take a look at who invests in 23andMe. Let's also take a look at the other companies they invest in. So that pretty much covers the standout tidbits about both of these companies, but when I look at both Ancestry.com and 23andMe, I see the government and military's fingerprints all over, which makes me wonder, is the government one of the third parties this data would be sold to? We wouldn't know. There's no transparency in the legal contracts on these websites that disclose who the third parties are, leaving people like me guessing and asking more annoying questions like, will they sell your DNA information to an insurance provider? Although there's legislation that protects Americans from discrimination in health insurance and employment decisions on the basis of genetic information, which is known as the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, the law has a loophole. It only applies to health insurance. It doesn't say anything about companies that sell life insurance, disability insurance, or long-term care insurance. Over the past few years, a growing issue with these DNA databases is that they'll hand your results over to the government if there's a warrant. There have been cases where the warrants to search DNA databases have been trying to link people to crimes. And since genes determine our facial features, scientists can build a 3D model of a face based on a person's DNA. And that also means if police find sufficient DNA at a crime scene, scientists will be able to build a model of the culprit. The overlying issue is, scientists have demonstrated that it's possible to fabricate DNA evidence, undermining the credibility of what was once considered the gold standard of proof in criminal cases. If you were a shifty character, it would be a dream to have a database of DNA that you could plant at various crime scenes, right? Which brings me to my final point on this. How can we ensure that the data and DNA will be handled ethically at all? And like I showed at the beginning of the video, you could speculate that DNA could be used for cloning purposes. They've been able to clone animals for a while. Why not humans? A movie called Boys from Brazil, released in 1978, is about Dr. Mengele cloning Hitler 95 times, giving pretty precise and accurate instruction on how to clone a human, and hoping to raise the resulting boys in Brazil with the ultimate goal of forming the Fourth Reich. And at the time that movie was released, everyone believed it to be fiction, but the Third Reich really did move to South America, in North America for that matter, and there is documentation of Mengele setting up clinics there. So which part of that movie was fiction? That they cloned Hitler 94 times instead of 95? And okay, I'll admit this is an extreme theory to follow, but I thought I'd throw it out there. My personal theory is that Google is the main third party buying up this data, storing not only your online habits, emails, and personal information in a database, but also your genetic makeup. And in the case of DNA, even if your family doesn't opt in and do their own DNA test, it doesn't matter. Google still has that information on them because they have your DNA. It's sort of similar to the way you don't even have to have a Facebook profile for Facebook to build a shadow profile on you. They can build a profile about you based on the information that friends and family, coworkers, or just anyone out there has about you, even if you don't have an account. While all of this information is sort of disturbing, I'm kind of conflicted on if it even matters. Hospitals have been pricking newborns' heels and collecting blood samples to test for genetic, metabolic, and developmental disorders since the 1960s. And if they didn't get you at birth, you got to do a DNA test if you join the military, and if they don't get you with any of those things, they're going to get you at your workplace. The March 2017 bill would allow employers to impose financial penalties on employees who don't participate in the company wellness programs. It would also allow those wellness programs to mandate genetic screening for participants. And furthermore, it would allow the results of that screening to be shared with third parties, including non-health professionals. In my opinion, all of that is overtly intrusive, which makes me ask, if everyone is aware, does anyone care? In general, we're all pretty complicit in the annihilation of our own privacy. We had a chance to defend it, but we chose convenience instead. And with the emergence of data mining now in cahoots with DNA mining, we know that the more information there is about you, the more predictable you get. And I wouldn't think for a second that this information will be used to benefit you.
2018 was the year that the total destruction of genetic privacy was disclosed to the general populace, thanks to the rise in popularity of for-profit DNA testing companies like Google-owned 23andMe, as well as Ancestry DNA, companies who sell your DNA to shadowy third parties. Can you imagine a world wherein any person at any time could be linked to a crime? Even one that occurred decades ago simply through a quick search on a universal DNA database. Welcome to reality. The push for public disclosure of a universal database began this year with a news story published in April, in which a genealogy database was utilized by police to solve the Golden State Killer cold case. The Golden State Killer was a predator who committed a series of rapes and murders across California nearly 40 years ago. This year, former police officer Joseph James D'Angelo was arrested after police uploaded an old DNA sample from one of the crime scenes to a popular genealogy database under a spoof name. From there, police were able to identify a genetic relative of the Golden State Killer. DNA sequences are unique not only to individuals but also to families. So it does not matter if you personally have not submitted a DNA sample through a service like 23andMe. These databases are able to build profiles on entire families if a single member submits their DNA. Partner that with the rate at which personal data is collected from social media platforms and sold to third parties. What are the potential consequences? What is being done with all of this information? And is the pursuit of justice for a few worth the sacrifice of genetic privacy for the masses? The sheer prospect of solving popular cold cases like the Zodiac murders have served as the vehicle to rally public support for a universal DNA database. And just like that, our genetic privacy was never taken, but a bulk of the population gave it away willingly, paying a high fee to have others profit from the most unique thing about them. At the end of November, reports emerged claiming that a Chinese scientist had created the world's first genome-edited babies, using a gene editing tool called CRISPR to delete a certain gene within the embryo. The result? A set of HIV-resistant twin girls, or so the reports claim. Though the media covered the story with a cautious tone, using adjectives like premature, dangerous, and irresponsible to describe these experiments, we must take note that the first genetically modified embryo story to make headlines was one pitched under the guise of disease eradication. Thus, this report was given a positive spin, despite the media's cautious cushioning. Movies like Gattaca have given us a glimpse of what the consequences of human-manipulated genetics and forced genetic engineering might look like. And even though genetic manipulation has long been dubbed a Franken theory of kooks, it's now very much a reality. The genetic modifications given to this set of twins will, inevitably, be inherited to their children, meaning that the long-term generational effects are unknown. If lessons of history partnered with not-so-fictional glimpses of the future disclosed in movies and television are any indicator of what's to come, science without ethics within the gene editing arena might result in something like a trend of designer babies, of which there is already a patent held by a Google-funded company. And inevitably, there will be a slow-roll form of eugenics if we follow down this path. But that's all hearsay. What's not hearsay is that the head scientists of these experiments went missing after reports of the genetically modified twin girls hit headlines. Curious, right?
Hey internet friends! Within all of us are traces of the past, present, and future. We carry the imprint of our ancestors which resulted in the sequence of right now. Us, in this moment, chock full of quirks our children will inherit, all written into our DNA. The hereditary material found in everyone, but is so specific and unique to an individual that it can reveal how likely we are to have freckles, how we interpret different tastes and smells, if we're carriers for certain diseases, and how our genes indicate our overall well-being. DNA tells a story, acting as a roadmap through our body's deeply intimate data. An individual's DNA is more identifying than a name, a social security number, or even a fingerprint. So why is a multinational tech company with a focus on internet-related services and products so interested in the genetic codes of millions of strangers? Why does a company that data mines from you want to mine DNA from you? And most importantly, why does Google want your DNA? Let me begin by introducing you to the Wojcicki sisters. You probably already know Susan. She served as the CEO of YouTube since 2014. Her sister, Janet, is a professor of pediatrics, with a great deal of her work taking place in Africa. The youngest sister, Anne, is the CEO of 23andMe, a for-profit human genome research company that allows consumers to study their ancestry, genealogy, and inherited traits. Anne was once married to Sergey Brin, Google's co-founder and current president of Google's parent company, Alphabet Inc. The story goes a little something like this. In 1998, Susan rented out a garage to Google founders Sergey Brin and Larry Page. Susan was hired as Google's 18th employee, and Sergey married her sister Anne in 2007, 1 year after Anne co-founded 23andMe. If you are wondering about the 23, it represents the number of chromosome pairs in humans. The company began as a mail-order genetics testing firm backed by investors like Anne's husband. The company offers kits that test and produce reports, which reveal anything from your ancestry to whether or not you carry genetic markers that are associated with risk for certain health conditions, to reports on your overall wellness and muscle composition and your likelihood of inheriting certain traits, ranging from hair color to how your body responds to alcohol or caffeine. All you have to do is purchase the kit, register it, spit in a tube, mail your prepaid package back to 23andMe, and then wait several weeks for your results. 23andMe's biobank is the world's largest repository of DNA samples. This biobank contains extensive health information on millions of individuals, and these DNA samples were willingly provided by paying customers. Selling access to this biobank to undisclosed third parties is a major source of profit for 23andMe. They've essentially monetized the human genome, which is all the genetic information on a person, packaged and sold like a commodity. This is probably why Google Ventures, the investment arm of Google, continues to financially back 23andMe, because Google already stores categories of the world's information. Having the world's largest repository of DNA samples certainly gives them an advantage in the multi-billion-dollar medical field. Though to build this biobank and continue to profit, 23andMe is always searching for new ways to get customers to join. That's probably why you recognize their Rainbow Box Kit that has been heavily marketed across television and the internet. Propagated endlessly on Anne's sister's stronghold, YouTube, by some of the same influencers who have interviewed the president at the White House and hosted Bill Gates on their channel. Other video makers create sponsored videos detailing their test results, showcasing special and unique details about themselves to their captive audience. You can see their sponsored referral links in their video descriptions. The packaging of this sponsored content often mirrors the packaging of the 23andMe kit, adorned with rainbow imagery, framing this whole pay to get your DNA stored in a biobank as harmless entertainment. But if we traveled somewhere over the rainbow and we discovered a lab in which we could put 23andMe under a microscope, would we observe only harmless entertainment for the consumer? Would 23andMe's mission statement to help people access, understand, and benefit from the human genome, would this mission statement stand tall amongst other noble pursuits? Or would we see a more complex reality? We've already identified 23andMe's Silicon Valley roots with 23andMe's personal and professional relationship with Google. Google's parent company, Alphabet Inc., resides in Silicon Valley amongst other juggernauts like Apple, Amazon, and even Twitter, companies that sell our data to third parties. And of course, the government can access this data as well. All they usually need is a warrant. We've allowed these companies to have access to our minds, our homes, our fingerprints, and now our DNA, because we believed we were the customer when we were actually the product. Plus, we didn't have time to read over those dozens of pages of terms and conditions. Ain't nobody got time for that.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
Now that we've established how the human genome is monetized by companies like 23andMe, let's discuss the privacy concerns, the potential for weaponization, and how the brave new world of the for-profit genome industry affects everyone. Concern over access to an individual's DNA data reignited back in April when California law enforcement announced the arrest of suspect Joseph James DeAngelo, otherwise known as the Golden State Killer, a name given to a serial killer from the 1970s. Recently, investigators reanalyzed the DNA found at one of the crime scenes, ran the results through a DNA base which linked back to one of DeAngelo's relatives. That's how they were able to tie him to the murders. While we can all agree it's great that they might have found a serial killer, how are we to know that this data is secure? Or who has access to it? With DNA being a revealing source of information about an individual, this is where the water begins to get murky. Your DNA sequence isn't yours alone. You share it with your relatives. And even though companies like 23andMe say they remove your information like your name and address when they allow third parties to access your DNA, anonymized DNA will never be truly anonymous because genes serve as identifying information. Studies have revealed that researchers could correctly uncover people's surnames from their genetic data alone with the aid of a DNA database. While the United States government already has most of our DNA on file if you were born in a hospital, joined the military, or were incarcerated in some states, DNA databases make it all the more convenient to nail you to a crime. With this new era of DNA testing, DNA altering services have emerged along with gene editing tools. So criminals could, theoretically, have their DNA permanently altered to avoid a repeat of this Golden State Killer situation. Doesn't gene editing sound like the basis of some weird sci-fi movie? Well, often the truth is stranger than fiction. For example, Google Ventures founder Bill Maris dismissed the fight to protect the privacy of genetic data, stating that if we keep our genetic information a secret, then we're all going to die. Someone needs to break it to old Bill that no one makes it out of life alive. But apparently he's pretty dedicated to the concept of immortality. Maris is the founder of Calico, who also invests in ancestry DNA. The goal of Calico is to hack the DNA of life and combat the effects of aging. Back in 2013, when Maris was asked about the research going on at Google Ventures, Maris indicated that the research could extend the human lifespan to 500 years. And he urged folks to embrace the idea of a life everlasting. But here's the thing, members of the upper echelon already use their platform to push the narrative that overpopulation is a problem. And in the future, the Earth's resources will be exhausted without population control. But if an extended lifespan is achieved, wouldn't overpopulation worsen? So how would it be determined who is allowed to live that long? Who can reproduce? Who gets to decide? Have you heard that scientists have linked genes to intelligence? 23andMe said it's not telling people their brain rating out of concern the information would be poorly received. So brain scores from DNA tests are being documented, just not disclosed to the consumer. What standards or incentives are in place for accuracy on reporting these scores amongst for-profit companies, whether it be scores for wellness or intelligence? And if the goal of 23andMe investors like Google Ventures is to extend the lifespan and eventually achieve immortality, will brain scores play a factor in who is approved to live that long? 23andMe already holds a designer baby patent, through which parents could predict certain traits in children. More specifically, what has been patented is the method of predicting from parents' DNA the likelihood their baby would have certain traits. The patent itself describes how the system could be utilized in fertility clinics, where the baby's sex, weight, eye color, intelligence, or personality characteristics, and even their risks for certain medical conditions could be decided upon before the baby is even conceived. While 23andMe reported they have no plans to use this designer baby system to the fullest extent, this does sound like a slippery slope to eugenics or the science of improving a human population by controlled breeding to increase the occurrence of desirable heritable characteristics, which, spoiler alert, has already been practiced in the United States and resulted in compulsory sterilization of patients in mental hospitals and the creation of the Negro Project in 1939 by Planned Parenthood founder Margaret Sanger, which yielded in a push for birth control amongst African American communities. Eugenics in the United States is not limited to these examples, but they do serve as a cautionary tale that yes, eugenics happened long ago and these eugenicists are still around today. Which brings us to our next point. Did you know there's such a thing as ethnobombs? Think of a biological weapon like anthrax or even the bubonic plague, but the weapon is tailored to target sequences that belong to specific ethnicities. In 1998, it was reported that Israel was developing a biological weapon targeted at Arab genes, leaving the ethnically Jewish unharmed. The ethnobomb they aimed to create was a genetically modified bacterium or virus. That was 20 years ago. Recently, it was revealed that Google has been providing the US military with their artificial intelligence technology. Is this why Google met with the White House 427 times during President Obama's tenure? How long until 23andMe's biobank is utilized by third parties like the US military to develop genetically targeted biological weapons? Or is that already taking place? While biological warfare has been around for some time, it seems like we have a few more years until designer babies are a reality for the average citizen. Right now, a potential soft eugenics is beginning to form, not at all the sole responsibility of 23andMe. The blame really falls on the behalf of American legislators, who are in the deep pockets of lobbyists. The Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act of 2008 prohibits some types of genetic discrimination in obtaining health insurance and employment, but there are loopholes. Last year, members of Congress attempted to remove a portion of the genetic privacy protection, allowing employers to demand to see their employees' genetic information. This is worrisome when we factor in the rise of direct-to-consumer DNA testing, the market of which is projected to grow exponentially over the next decade. On the 23andMe website, the fine print reads, if you are asked by an insurance company whether you have learned genetic information about health conditions and you do not disclose them, well, it may be considered fraud on your behalf. So in the future, when the trend continues to show that our legislators favor corporations over citizens, if your aunt or your brother or your grandma take a DNA test and their results reveal they have a propensity towards a difficult to treat condition, will your employer or your insurer drop you after having access to your family's DNA reports? With the average American not being able to cover the costs of out-of-pocket healthcare, will we see a rise in deaths associated with treatable conditions once insurance companies have access to these reports and individuals' genes are used against them? So let's circle back to this question. Why does Google want your DNA? While I realize the possibilities and examples I provided in this video paint a dark picture, it's important you understand that even the smallest act can change the course of the future. The purpose of this video is not to belittle your wants or desires of discovering information about yourself and your family, but my goal here is to illustrate that we've allowed companies to have access to our homes, our minds, and now our DNA. Yes, technology is a double-edged sword. It has the potential to help and to harm. If we look back on our history with these tech companies like Google, we'd see that our privacy was never taken from us. We gave it up willingly. But that doesn't mean we have to keep repeating this pattern. Please take a moment to research the risks associated with any service you use. Whether it's posting a picture of your newborn baby on Facebook or sending a vial of your spit to a DNA testing company. What do you think, internet friends? Have you ever used these DNA testing services? What was your experience? You know, I always look forward to your comments. Thank you so much for watching and supporting my channel on Patreon. Bye!